In literally at this moment, Deanna Durante, my colleague, of course, who is inside the courtroom right now, she is tweeting out that the verdict is in, guilty on all counts. So Bill Cosby, guilty on all counts. This jury in this case decided that he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And that means that he has a potential to spend the rest of his life in prison, depending on sentencing in this case. Again, those counts all about aggravated indecent assault related to whether the victim consented, whether she was unconscious.
Rosemary, let me just jump in here. We're watching on the right-hand side of your screen women literally just poured out of that courtroom, breaking down in tears. I want to bring in Judge Michael Donio. He is on the phone. Judge, if you could hear me, your reaction to this verdict.
Well, I can't say I'm totally surprised because of what we talked about yesterday, the 404B, the other 5 people that testified in the case. That was very compelling testimony, as we said. And what it did is it bolstered the testimony of Ms. Constant. We talked about this other victims, crimes, witnesses during the first trial. We talked about it leading up to the second trial and the fact that the judge allowed 5 of those other women to testify. And I think that if and when any of these jurors speak, I think that you're going to hear that that tilted the scale in this case.
To my colleague Jim Rosenfield, who is live outside the courthouse in Norristown. Jim.
Hey, Aaron, obviously a lot going on here outside the courthouse. We still have Deanna Durante inside that courtroom as the verdict is read, and now the jury is being polled one by one. This is normal procedure to confirm with each juror that this is in fact their decision, and on all counts, as you've heard, of course, it is a guilty verdict. We've also heard from inside that courtroom that there were sobs that were heard in the back from some of the victims who had come forward, who wanted to be here for these proceedings, alleged victims, other women who had come forward to accuse Bill Cosby. He, of course, had always denied these allegations, but today, for the first time, he is found guilty on 3 counts in an incident that dates back to 2004. So as we've been talking about this really was a she said, he said, but in this particular trial, which is different from the trial we saw 1 year ago, we heard from those 5 other women, and we know that this jury was spending quite a bit of time thinking about the defense's star witness, who had testified that she had heard Andrea Constant talking about some sort of plan that she perhaps would hatch to go after a famous person and try and get money. The jury in this case did hear that Andrea Constant got millions of dollars in a civil suit that she had filed against Bill Cosby, but it really came down to who do you believe? The judge instructing this panel of 7 men and 5 women, you really just have to decide whether Andrea Constant is believable. If she is, then you must go with your gut, and that decision, if you believe her, would be guilty. I want to bring in with me here our legal analyst, Enrique Latoizen. Enrique, fairly quick decision by this jury. We waited last year for 5 days, and then it was a hung jury. They could not reach a verdict. Today, guilty on all counts. What are your thoughts at this point?
Well, I can tell you right now, Jim, what's taking place right now is, they already polled the jury, and after they get done polling the jury, I will tell you that the prosecution in this case will make a pitch to have Mr. Cosby's bail revoked.
Right.
And they will pitch that to the judge. They'll say, Judge, he is now guilty of all 3 charges. He faces a minimum of 5 to 10 on each and every last charge. Now, there's no mandatory minimums on this case, but they'll ask for his bail to be revoked. And when that takes place, the defense will then already prepared will start to argue all the reasons why his bail should not be revoked. He's not a flight risk, his age, his blindness, his health, and things of that nature. So
give him time to get his affairs in order, that sort of thing, but the judge could say absolutely not. He could go to jail today from this courthouse.
He could go to jail today, right now. The bail could be revoked, the bail could be raised, and Mr. Cosby could be given an opportunity to post that bail. And then what will happen is they'll start a pre-sentence investigation. That pre-sentence investigation will take a couple months. It'll be be the time for the court to do a mock-up of Mr. Cosby, his background, and everything about him, and then for them to make a recommendation on what his sentencing should be, and then they will come back for that sentencing.
You've shifted a little bit. The smaller picture there is outside the courthouse, on the courthouse steps, and we are just awaiting to see if we can see Bill Cosby or perhaps his defense attorneys or prosecutors. There's Andrea Constand right there, leaving, all smiles, with her arms around several people, and there goes her team. They are headed out. And this is the shot that we've been seeing every day when she comes in, every day when she goes out. We just saw Andrea Constand leave the courtroom there, out of the hallway, followed by several others. All right, as the camera then pans back there to the courtroom, you can see it looks like folks have really just emptied out here. All right, there's some of Bill Cosby's folks there. And we're still watching and we're still waiting. If you're just joining us here on NBC 10, a jury of 7 men, 5 women have come back with a guilty verdict. Bill Cosby guilty on all counts. NBC 10's Deanna Durante has been inside the courtroom every single day of this trial. She was there every single day last year during the first time around. Deanna, give us some insight. What happened inside that courtroom today?
I want you to take a look as you can see that people are gathering here inside the courtroom. What we saw was not America's dad, not as Kevin Steele, the district attorney in Montgomery County, asked the judge to revoke Bill Cosby's bail, saying that he is a flight risk, saying that we've heard in this trial that $3.4 million is a paltry sum of money, and that Bill Cosby owns a plane. That is when Bill Cosby screamed at Kevin Steele, saying he doesn't own a plane, calling him a word I cannot use on television, and then saying I'm sick of him. His aide that we have seen walk by his side every day of this trial then stood next to him, and Cosby shrugged him off.
Deanna, just sorry to interrupt, but we just saw Bill Cosby, as you were talking there, walking out. So he's going to be walking out any minute there with his entourage, as he's been coming in and out every day. But he's going to be coming out there any moment. He just left the courtroom.
He is going to be going home. He's going to be going to his Cheltenham residence. He is not going into custody at this point. There was a lengthy discussion there about whether or not his bail should be revoked. We're told that it could be about 20 minutes to a half hour before the jury leaves. We're not sure if Bill Cosby is going to be fitted for electronic monitoring at this point. At this point, we're told he is to be on house arrest until they can assure that he will return for his sentencing. Right now, he is free on 10% of $1 million bail. And if you're looking at video of him going through the courthouse there, he's had his own secure entrance and exit there as he leaves, and he'll come out here the front door. We were told before the verdict was read that his spokesperson would be making a statement at a podium near the car that they have come in. We do not know if, now that the verdict did not go Bill Cosby's way, if his people will be addressing this at all. Remember, he had a team of lawyers here, 9 lawyers in this room working on this defense. The last trial, he had 1 Pennsylvania lawyer, 1 out-of-state lawyer, and after 6 days, it was a hung jury. This jury deliberated for about 13 hours over 2 days and came up with this verdict, all of them saying they agree with the guilty verdict here. The foreperson was juror number 2. She read the verdict. Cosby didn't react. Andrea Constand was in the room. She was sitting in the front row on the prosecution side. Minutes before the jury came in, the DA went and spoke with her, explained to her how she was not to react. Once the jury came in, once they read that verdict, her attorney arrived a short time later, sat 3 rows behind her. But again, the big development here was Bill Cosby and his reaction, not when the verdict was read, he sat silently, but when it was time for the district attorney to stand up and plead with the judge to revoke his bail. The judge repeatedly said over and over that for 2.5 years, Bill Cosby has shown up at all of his court appearances, that he did not believe Cosby was a flight risk. We have learned Montgomery County detectives are holding on to Bill Cosby's passport. Cosby has told the judge he has no other copies of passports, and the judge says that he must go home to his home in Cheltenham Township, and that is where he is to remain until sentencing.
We saw him not too long ago leave the courtroom, walk out of frame, and we think he might be on the elevator. So that is why you see that camera there positioned on the elevator. So we're going to stay on this to see if we can see if this is, in fact, Bill Cosby getting off this elevator. There's his lawyer, his defense attorney, Tom Mesereau, and it looks like member of his team. Yes, there's Andrew Wyatt and Bill Cosby. All right, coming off of the elevator on this ground floor. We saw him leave the courtroom a couple of minutes ago, but now finally making his way down and looks like making his way out of the courthouse right now. We're going to wait the smaller picture there on the left-hand side of your screen to see if we can see if he's going to come out and make a statement. We just heard a statement from some words from Gloria Allred and some of the accusers that she represents. Okay. On the right-hand side of your screen there you can see it appears that he's just walking past those throngs of reporters there, and he is making his way out with an escort, as he has been on the way in and on the way out every day of this trial that we have seen over the past nearly 2 weeks or so, raising his hand in the air there with his cane, and that is one of his spokespeople, Andrew Wyatt, there leading the way. This is the way that he has come in every day for this trial, and he has come out. But as we heard from NBC 10's Deanna Durante not too long ago, no reaction to the verdict. Found guilty on all counts in a high-stakes sexual assault retrial. NBC 10 was first to bring you the verdict. Bill Cosby guilty on all 3 counts.
Let's get straight to our live team coverage. We begin with NBC 10's Jim Rosenfield outside the Montgomery County Courthouse in Norristown. Jim.
Jackie, there was a flurry of activity right after that verdict was announced here outside the courthouse in Norristown. That verdict, as you mentioned, came down just a few hours ago. Guilty, in fact, on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault. NBC 10's Deanna Durante is joining me once again live here in Norristown on the courthouse steps. Deanna, you were here for the entire trial. You were inside that courtroom today as that verdict was read. Tell me what that was like in there. What was the mood?
Well, it was very, very quiet. You heard a little chatter as we were waiting, and then when that verdict was read, you heard these gasps. The courtroom doors opened, and you could hear sobbing outside. We couldn't tell at the time, but that was some women that had been in the courtroom, accusers of Bill Cosby, that were ushered outside. They were sobbing in the hallway. And then during the moment where the district attorney asked the judge to revoke Bill Cosby's bail, he stood up and he yelled at the DA. The DA says, for a brief moment, he says, we saw who Bill Cosby really is. The man known as America's dad could end up spending his final years in prison. Bill Cosby found guilty on all counts in his sexual assault retrial. The comedian stared straight ahead as the verdict was read. Moments later, he lashed out at the district attorney, Kevin Steele, calling him an a-hole after the prosecutor demanded the 80-year-old be sent immediately to jail. Outside the courtroom, attorney Gloria Allred declared the verdict a victory for womanhood.
The Me Too movement has arrived and is well and is living in Montgomery County, throughout this nation and throughout this world.
As he left the courthouse, Cosby waved to the crowd, got into an SUV, and returned to his home, where he will remain free on $1 million bail as he awaits his sentencing. After the verdict, the district attorney became teary-eyed as he commended Cosby's victim, Andrea Constant, for having the courage to come forward.
We have shown from our record that money and power, or who you are, will not stop us from a criminal investigation or prosecuting a case.
And we can tell you that Bill Cosby will be back here in Norristown for his sentencing sometime within the next 90 days is when the judge will set that sentencing date. You saw him wave outside, but inside that courtroom again, he yelled at the DA, not only calling him that name, but saying he was sick of this guy. Reporting live in Norristown, Deanna Durante, NBC 10 News.
Yeah, Deanna, that was quite a moment. And you mentioned the district attorney became emotional during that news conference after the verdict. Kevin Steele really resolved that he was going to try this case during the campaign, right?
He did, and that was part that didn't come into this case. There was a lot of talk over a campaign ad in which he said, or he pledged when he was running, that he would get sexual predators like Bill Cosby. But he says that in this case it was about doing the right thing. He says when that deposition was unsealed, the deposition in which Andrea Constand had sued Bill Cosby, that was a game changer in this case. That gave them another piece to go after this. Of course, last summer we were here. The jury couldn't reach a verdict. Today, they came back, 7 men, 5 women in less than 14 hours with that guilty verdict. And one other note, they all stood up. The defense demanded that they all be polled, which means they have to stand up, have their juror number read, and say what they voted, and all 12 of them said they voted guilty.
Kevin Steele saying, finally today, we are in a place to say justice was done here in Montgomery County. Deanna Durante, thanks once again. The Cosby verdict brings justice for the victim, Andrea Constand, Cosby's accuser. She was in the courtroom for that verdict today. And NBC 10's Rosemary Connors is live also outside the courthouse with more on Constand's reaction. She didn't speak herself at the news conference, but others did on her behalf. Right, Rosemary?
That is right, Jim. Andrea Constand has been cool, calm, and collected throughout the course of this trial. Perhaps she had a bigger smile on her face, though, during that press conference, that news conference with the district attorney's office when the DA commended her for her bravery. As you can see in this video from inside the courthouse, as she left the courtroom, she was flanked by both a representative from the district attorney's office and her longtime attorney, Dolores Troiani. Troiani has been with Constand since the very beginning. She's the one who pursued civil action against Bill Cosby when initially her claims were not brought forth to a criminal trial. Also, Andrea Constand has been bolstered by the other accusers, other women who have said that Bill Cosby did the same thing to them, that he drugged them and he molested them. Although for those women, their claims were unfortunately not able to meet that statute of limitations. So Andrea Constand has been a voice in some respects on their behalf. Dolores Troiani did speak in that news conference for Andrea Constand, and she said that other women now look to Constand as a pillar of strength.
She came here 14 years ago for justice. I am so happy today that I can say that although justice was delayed, it was not denied.
Long overdue in this case, as Dolores Troiani later said during that news conference, Jim. But as we were watching District Attorney Kevin Steele and Andrea Constand stand there together, you could tell that this was a moment they will savor certainly for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and the district attorney saying Andrea Constand is inspiring to all of us. All right, Rosemary Connors, appreciate it. Bill Cosby right now, he is back in his Cheltenham home where he must remain until he is sentenced, which again we expect in the next few months. And NBC 10's Andrea Klein-Thomas is in the neighborhood. She is there live. Andrea, quite the spectacle, I'm sure, as that SUV pulled into the property.
That is absolutely right, Jim. Now, Cosby has been here for about an hour and a half. Of course, there has to be a lot on his mind. He'll have plenty of time to think about it because, as you said, he has to be here while he is out on bail. Take a look at that video of him arriving home earlier this afternoon. He entered through a side driveway and was taken to the back of the house. Now, it's a home Cosby has owned for more than 30 years. He's going to have to stay here until sentencing, while on nearly 3 acres, the home sits in a very busy neighborhood. A number of people have come by hoping to get a glimpse of the comedian. Others have driven by shouting their varying opinions about the case. Now, Nasir tells me he met the comedian a number of times and was able to talk to him. Here are some of his thoughts.
We live in a very sensitive time right now, and it's a Me Too type of moment. So I feel like very, very hurt that someone like of Bill Cosby's standard is actually being convicted of, you know, something of this nature. So it's very sad.
And we can talk again about.
And, you know, despite that conviction, as you just heard, Bill Cosby still has a lot of support from folks. A woman I talked to, I asked her if she was able to separate Dr. Huxtable, the iconic character, from Bill Cosby, and she said she couldn't. Reporting live in Cheltenham, Andrea Klein-Thomas, NBC 10 News.
All right, Andrea Klein-Thomas, we appreciate it. And I'm joined once again by our legal analyst here at NBC 10, Enrique Latoizen. Let's talk about what Bill Cosby can and can't do right now. The judge is taking his passport, saying he must remain here in the Commonwealth. Can he leave home for any reason?
Well, typically how it works is that you're allowed to leave between certain hours to maybe run errands and do things of a personal nature. You can't leave the state, cannot leave the country, and it has to be things that are important. Sometimes they make sure you're there either by an electronic device that they put on your ankle, or sometimes they do a phone call check-in where you have to answer the phone between certain hours to make sure that you are there.
But obviously this severely limits what he can and can't do. He can't travel out of state. He can't go to New York, where he also has a home. He can't do any of that until the sentencing takes place. And let's talk about the factors that would come into play when the judge weighs what the sentence should be. There will be obviously several reports that are done that the judge will consider. Talk to us about what's in those reports. What do they take into account?
Well, those reports will take into account his prior history. They will take in his current health. They will take in things about him and different things that are going on with him. They're going to take in a place, you know, they have the sexual predator report that he has to do to see whether or not he's considered a violent person. All these things come into account. Now, a judge has to put on the record the reasons for his sentencing and the things that he's relying on. So the defense is going to have an opportunity to put on a mini trial and to tell the judge why they believe he should not be incarcerated. The prosecution is going to get that same chance. They'll be able to put on witnesses and they'll be able to tell the court why they believe that Mr. Cosby should be put in jail.
Is it possible at this sentencing phase that we will hear from other women? Would the prosecutor be able to put other women on the stand once again to talk about a pattern of behavior?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I believe they will do that. They will give these women a voice and they will give them an opportunity to tell the judge what happened to them and why, you know, the things that affected their life and why Mr. Cosby should be jailed for that.
Now, it would not necessarily be the same 5 who testified at trial, would it?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
They can bring in other people that this affected and other women that accused him. This is a sentencing phase. It pretty much becomes wide open. It's like a similar Nassar, you know, sentencing that took place with the gymnastics. You saw there were many women that came in and testified, even though only a couple were the actual people that he was being convicted of.
All right, Enrique Latoiza, we appreciate your insights as always. Thanks for being here throughout this deliberation phase and today's guilty verdict. Appreciate it. NBC 10, of course, was the first to break this story on air and online. Major court victory for the Me Too movement, as we've been mentioning. You can download the NBC 10 app for a deeper look at the reaction and what it might mean for other cases. But for now, we want to send it back to the studios and Jack. House throughout this trial, as we saw last year at the first trial, and things got a little bit testy today after the verdict was announced. And for more on that, we turn to NBC 10's Drew Smith, who's also here live with me in Norristown. Drew.
Yeah, and Jim, I was down with the crowds who really surrounded this entire building. They got up on the steps and they filled all of the sidewalks. Many of them had different reasons for being here. They wanted to shout their opinion at the man who was just found guilty, and it led to a loud and contentious atmosphere. Claiming victory outside Montgomery County's courthouse, activists who have called out Bill Cosby as a predator each day during this trial celebrated watching the comedian leave court a guilty man.
This victory is a great start for the laws to change. So something bigger is going to be happening out of this.
Women who say they have their own Me Too stories to share say they feel solidarity with the victim in this case, and they have a message for Cosby.
Rot in hell! Go to jail!
Others say after 2 trials and this guilty verdict, they're still unsure about what Cosby did.
I don't trust the system.
The two sides at times clashing out here on the sidewalk.
I want to be by his side, baby!
After all this, Cosby still has his fans.
This whole thing is devastating. It's embarrassing. You know, we're standing here watching America's father get he's going to put in prison.
And we asked some of those people why they were still supporting Bill Cosby after all of this, and they said they grew up watching him. They viewed him as a groundbreaker and someone who is so important to this community. In response, people on the other side said they needed to open their eyes to what happened here today. Live in Norristown, I'm Drew Smith, NBC 10 News.
Yeah, the district attorney saying we saw the real Bill Cosby today in court. All right, Drew Smith, thanks for that. We're breaking down every angle of this guilty verdict for you. And former New Jersey Superior Court Judge Michael Donio joining us once again from our Breaking News Center. Judge, thanks for being here. What do you think the defense will try to do during sentencing?
Well, the biggest thing they're going to try to do, Jim, is let Mr. Cosby stay out of jail if he is sentenced to jail while that appeal is pending. That is going to be the next big argument that'll be made if there's going to be a jail component. They will do everything they can do to try to get bail continued while that appeal would go on that could take a year or 18 months.
In your experience, did you let someone stay out of jail on bail during an appeal?
I think, Jim, in 20 years it happened maybe twice. And let me give you an example of why you would do something like that. I specifically remember having a case where there was a very unique legal issue that came up in the middle of the trial. I had to make a ruling on that decision, which I did. I knew there was an appeal pending in the New Jersey Supreme Court on the exact same issue. I knew that if I made a ruling, which I did, and the Supreme Court disagreed with that ruling in a different case, but the same issue, that my conviction in my case would be overturned. In that case, I wanted to give the defendant the benefit of the doubt and not have him sit in jail for a year while the Supreme Court was addressing that issue. So in that kind of a situation, I let the defendant stay out of jail on bail pending that decision being raised and decided by the Supreme Court. That would be like a reason that you might consider extending bail during an appeal for something extreme like that.
Information about Bill Cosby in the last hour. Temple University said it will decide what to do next with Cosby's honorary degree. So they have some decisions to make in the wake of this guilty verdict today here in Montgomery County. NBC 10's Brandon Hudson is live on Temple's campus tonight. Brandon, what's the reaction you're hearing there?
Well, Jim, we got some mixed reaction. Even though Cosby has cut ties with Temple University, his name is still talked about here in North Philly. Here's what some people had to say about the Cosby verdict.
I think it happened, but I don't think it happened the way she said it happened.
You think he did it, or you think he's innocent?
I can't say for sure, but I mean, when you married and you bringing women to your house, that's a different floor right there.
He should serve time if he can, write a book, do whatever he can. But these women have been in jail in their minds for a long time.
I think it's really good news. I think it should have happened probably a very long time ago that he was found guilty. It's very upsetting that it took this long.
Now, keep in mind, Cosby went here in the 60s and had a seat on the board of the trustees. A couple people we talked to said they don't think this guilty verdict will change Cosby's perception or legacy. Live in North Philly, I'm Brandon Hudson, NBC 10 News.
Trial played out very differently, as we know now from Cosby's first trial. Jurors this time around had much more evidence to consider, different evidence to consider, different testimony. Let's compare this jury to the jury in Cosby's first trial. That first jury deliberated for 52 hours over 6 days, but they were deadlocked. They could not reach a unanimous decision. This second jury, they spent 14 hours over 2 days and convicted the comedian, as we know now, on all counts. In the 10 months between Cosby's first trial and his last, the Me Too movement spread across this country, an uprising against sexual assault. It came after revelations of sexual misconduct by men across Hollywood. And the attorney for Cosby's accusers, Gloria Allred, talked about how the Me Too movement impacted this trial.
Finally, we can say women are believed, and not only on #MeToo, but in a court of law where they were under oath, where they testified truthfully, where they were attacked, where they were smeared.
This is video of one of Cosby's accusers crying and celebrating outside the courtroom right after that verdict was read in the courtroom. Let's bring in NBC 10's Rosemary Connors, who's live here in Norristown as well tonight. Rosemary, this is the first major celebrity court case of the Me Too movement.
Jim, it is, and it was Bill Cosby's own defense team who uttered the words "Me Too" in closing arguments, perhaps hoping to capitalize on any backlash that may have grown over the movement. Andrea Constand has been calm and collected in the wake of this verdict. However, as you can see, the other women, her supporters, who have come out here to court day after day to say they too have been abused at the hands of Cosby, they couldn't help but shed tears and embrace each other as they left the courthouse this afternoon. Emotions have been running high all afternoon here in Norristown. For these other women who have come forward to accuse Bill Cosby, say they too have been drugged and molested by him. They feel vindicated, even though their claims could never result in criminal charges because of the statute of limitations running out. They tell me that Andrea Constand is a source of strength for them and for all women.
I feel like my faith in humanity is restored.
It means that the justice system is finally paying attention. They're finally listening and they're finally moving forward and hearing women's voices. We are not invisible anymore.
It's also a victory for all sexual assault survivors, female and male. It's a victory for womanhood.
As we mentioned, Andrea Constand, she did not give any comment during that news conference with District Attorney Kevin Steele. However, her longtime attorney, Dolores Troiani, did speak on her behalf. She said that this verdict has been long overdue. Justice may have been delayed in this case, but not denied. Reporting live outside the Montgomery County Courthouse, I'm Rosemary Connors, NBC 10 News. Jim?